Well, for journalists, it's the annual rite of passage into the new year, the opportunity to reflect on the past year's top news stories. From a government shutdown to the national rollout of the Affordable Care Act to chemical weapons in Syria to Kentucky lawmakers lobbying for the rights of farmers to grow industrial hemp to a most interesting political year shaping up. 2013 has indeed been a year to remember. So to do just that, we're going to invite some journalists into the studios and take a look back. Stay with us. Kentucky Outlook is next. Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Kentucky Outlook. I'm Barbara Deeb. We're glad you joined us. Well, as we mentioned, we are going to take a look back at the year 2013. Every year is filled with news, but we thought it would be a good opportunity to reflect, look ahead, and see what we've learned and what we can look forward to in 2014. Welcome to the program with me, if you will, Chuck Mason. He is with the Bowling Green Daily News. His concentration is education. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And in addition, we are joined by Kevin Willis. You know his voice, and now you see his face. He is the news director at WKU Public Radio. That's WKU-NPR, WKYU-FM. Glad to have you here.
Thanks, Barb. Thanks for having me.
Let's start with the big global picture. And as we speak, there's some action taking place in Washington. We want to talk about that a little bit because as it relates to the government shutdown. But I want to start with Time Magazine's Person of the Year. Okay? It's out today, and guess who they chose? They chose the Pope. Okay? Which is, a great idea. But what I found interesting was that number 2 on their list was the NSA leaker, Mr. Snowden. What do you think? Throw it out there.
Well, I think the choice for the Pope was a good choice because he has stepped down into the common people again, and he's redefining the papacy. It's shocking that Snowden is number two, but he really pulled back the curtain. He was like the Wizard of Oz. He pulled back the curtain, and he showed us a government that's into just about everything that we didn't think it was into.
Surprise!
Yes.
You have an interesting insight into that.
As far as the Edward Snowden thing, Barb, we had talked about how at a time when Edward Snowden was being vilified by many in the media and in the political world, of course. One of his, I don't know if call him staunch defenders, but somebody who was speaking out on his behalf was Kentucky's junior U.S. Senator Rand Paul of Bowling Green, and talking about how he compared Edward Snowden to being what he called, I think, a whistleblower or somebody who was just sort of pulling the curtain back and exposing these things, and that, I think, saying that maybe we owed him a debt of gratitude for that.
So really a different take, and from someone who you wouldn't necessarily think would feel that way. Kind of interesting.
Senator Paul has talked a lot. A lot about what he considers government overreach. I think this is an example of the libertarian where it's interesting in the sense that the libertarian doesn't fit the traditional stereotypes of what a conservative or a Republican might be, and how you find yourself sometimes with strange bedfellows, people maybe on the left who you wouldn't normally associate, liking Rand Paul, maybe agreeing with what he said in his defense of Snowden.
But Snowden, has definitely left his mark. We have yet to see, where that will go, but as a result of his activity, so much more has come to light. So much more. So were you going to say?
And I think that in looking at Paul, he did the thing with the drones too, and he started getting America thinking about the idea that not only are they listening to us, they could be looking at us from above. And it started making people a little uncomfortable. And I think that what's going to happen when the lawmakers start looking at things next year, they're going to start looking at some of these issues with drones and with the NSA.
And it's also something you could see as perhaps part of a presidential platform. Perhaps for Senator Paul.
It's a nice segue there, Kevin. 2016 looks like Senator Rand Paul is testing the waters as we speak, hasn't come out and officially said he's going to run for president, but the conventional wisdom is that that's why he's testing the waters.
And that's why you find yourself in Vogue magazine, that's why you find yourself in New Hampshire, that's why you find yourself in Iowa, that's why you find yourself in Jerusalem. because he is setting the table. He's getting everybody used to this idea of a guy from Kentucky who could lead the nation.
I think it's also why I agree with Chuck, and you see him speaking to the Detroit Economic Club recently.
Yes.
The junior senator from Kentucky addressing folks in Detroit. And something else that's interesting about that, Barb, is afterwards, Senator Paul admitted that he made some comments about how, not that he's necessarily having second thoughts about running for president, his line has been that he is seriously considering it.
And I feel like he's really been genuine in that regard.
And he said that it's something that he's seriously looking at, but he recently had a bit of a nasty bout with the media where it was shown that he, in some of his speeches and in some of his writings that have been published in newspapers, that some passages have been lifted without attribution. And this caused some embarrassment amongst the Paul camp. And Senator Paul at one point sort of lashed out and said that this was the work of people he called haters. And after speaking to the Detroit Economic Club, he admitted that he goes back and forth about public life, that he says that he enjoys serious discussion about things like what he considers government overreach concerning drones or the Constitution, but he's getting tired of what he feels is some of this nitpicky criticism.
Well, you know, I mean, it's part of if you're going to swim in those waters, you have to be ready to take some of that.
I think this is just the tip of the iceberg if you're running for president. You better get used to it.
Well, and the fact was, he needs to understand that, if it's a staff issue, he needs to own up to it quickly and move on. To simply sit there and say, oh, no, that didn't happen. He knew it did. So, he just needs to say, okay, we made a mistake. We've corrected it, and we're going to move on, because he's going to find out that the media are going to be all over him if he's running for president.
And like you say, just be honest, nip it in the bud. And when you run a race of that magnitude for president of the United States, and you have to rely on so many people to carry your message, guess what? That carrier pigeon sometimes gets detoured. So yeah, it happens. Okay, you open up the politics book. Let's talk. Let's talk about Allison Lundergan Grimes and a man named Matt Bevin, who are going to challenge Senator Mitch McConnell in the upcoming election. Surprise, surprise, or maybe we're going to have some real races here?
I don't know. I'm new to Kentucky politics, I'll admit that, but I don't see a serious primary challenge for McConnell. I think that this guy's probably going to self-destruct once it gets down into the heat of it.
This guy, Matt Bevin?
Yeah, Bevin.
What about this woman,
The
Allison
woman,
Lundergan
on the
Grimes?
other hand, that's going to be interesting, because she has a high profile in Kentucky. She comes from a well-connected family politically, and he had a pretty tough race the last time around. So everybody knows that he could be there for the taking.
One of the things you might normally look at when an incumbent was facing a primary challenge, you might say that even if the primary challenger doesn't knock off the incumbent, you might say, well, this is going to be bad for the incumbent because it may cause him or her to have to spend a lot of money, perhaps, to get past that primary challenge. Mitch McConnell's never had trouble raising money. He's not having trouble now, nor will he. And it's hard to imagine that he wouldn't easily be able to recoup whatever he would have to spend to defeat Matt Bevin in the primary. But this is going to be, if Democrats really, really believe that they have a chance to knock off Mitch McConnell, this is going to be their number one priority. And you just wait and see the amount of money and attention and commercials and organizations that are going to be flooding in on both sides in order to defend and to take out Senator McConnell.
And his seniority, I mean, his access to so many things. Reflecting on the year 2013, which is what we're doing here today on Kentucky Outlook, how has Senator McConnell fared in world matters, in national matters? How will that reflect as we go forward?
Well, I think he's fared well domestically. I mean, when it came down to it, when they had to have the budget deal and things like that, he was able to work in the normal circles that he worked in. I thought it was laughable when they were painting him as a liberal, because anybody who knows Mitch McConnell knows he's not a liberal. I think that the thing that is going to change things is just when they challenged Harry Reid in Nevada, and everybody watched that race to see whether Harry Reid could be knocked off. Now you're going to have the same kind of thing with McConnell. Everybody's going to be watching to see whether McConnell can be knocked off. not necessarily in the primary, but possibly the general.
It's going to make a lot of media outlets happy, lots of campaign spending.
It sure will. The closest thing I think I could, the thing that it reminds me of is when Tom Daschle was knocked out. And I believe he was the head of the Democratic Party in the Senate. I believe he was majority leader at the time. And of course, that was obviously not in the primary, that was the Republican challenger. But the same sort of question for Kentucky voters. Barb, you mentioned seniority. When it comes down to it, are enough Kentuckians willing to throw out somebody who maybe they don't love, but maybe they look at him and say, you know, this guy's really powerful, he's prestigious, and do we really want to throw him out?
Throw away that. That's
And they'd be
very-
taking down a lot of signs, McConnell this, McConnell that, McConnell this, all through the state of Kentucky. Businesses, developments, riverfront, you know, all kinds of different things that he's brought to the state, you know, through having that influence. And you throw that away, now you're back to square one.
Yeah, that's something for people to think about.
And Barb, you mentioned, you know, reflecting on the year domestically. We mentioned Senator
Right.
McConnell, but in terms of internationally, what comes to my mind was his both he and Senator Paul's vocal opposition. Paul more than McConnell, but eventually taking to the Senate floor, Senator McConnell speaking out against U.S. military involvement in Syria. Both Kentucky senators were very much against that, and you think back, that was a time when it appeared that President Obama may have been thinking about ordering U.S. involvement without going to Congress.
That's right.
Senator Paul was one of the people out in front calling for the president to saying no, that you have to go to the Congress to get this authorization. That you can't just call this a military strike or a pinprick or anything like that. No, if you're launching bombs and missiles, this is war, and then you need to be authorized to do so. And of course, the president did that, and when it became obvious that it wasn't going to pass, he ended up pulling that idea. But again, that was one of the main ways in which the two U.S. senators from this state, I think, played a role.
In the big picture.
Yeah, in the big international picture.
Let's talk about that big international picture, which chemical weapons in Syria. Okay, we're in Bowling Green, Kentucky. Really, does that affect us? But it does in many ways. Just like people might think we actually arrested 2 terrorists here in Bowling Green, Kentucky. So let's take both of those, okay? How is it then that people should view, not that we're telling you how to view, but what's a way to look at that issue of chemical weapons in Syria, bringing it home? I think people forget how close we are to some stores of chemical weapons.
There's the Bluegrass Army Depot in Richmond, and it turned out, Barb, that once this news about some of the specific weapons that were being used in Syria, I don't think there's really much doubt, that in fact some of these agents were being stored in Richmond, and that's something that makes some people in that Richmond-Madison County area pretty nervous.
And near a school. I mean, so, but that's an issue that's been ongoing. The gentleman that we had in here, Craig Williams, to talk about that, basically he is very optimistic and hopes that within 5 years they'll be gone. Out of here.
It's something that's been talked about a
Yes,
lot. I think
for a
that
long time.
It's been talked about. It's been something that much of the congressional delegation has sought federal funding in order to get those agents destroyed and out of the Bluegrass State.
So, I mean, those bigger picture issues do affect us all. They
And
do.
I think, you know, the Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, you know, recently received the Nobel Prize in Oslo today, and they've been working for 16 years to get rid of these chemical weapons, not only in Syria, but all across the country. And even though, you know, it's not happening quickly, I mean, we're looking at a deadline in Syria maybe June of 2014, but it's starting to move, and
So
people
there's
are
some
starting to
momentum?
talk. That's right.
But the key is, does that snowball keep going down the hill, or is that
Yeah.
momentum going to halt with other things? But right now, it's in a good place.
Definitely.
The momentum is there.
Definitely.
So back to the terrorists in Bowling Green, that activity got a lot of people's attention, that yes, it can happen here and it can happen at home, that they arrested those 2 gentlemen. What is the status of that, Kevin?
They've been sentenced, and
Yeah.
these are 2 individuals who were caught in Bowling Green, who the government says were conspiring to send money, weapons, and other types of equipment through someone who they thought was a go-between to get this eventually to members of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And you're right, Barb, you don't normally associate small town like Bowling Green, Kentucky, with anything involving international terrorism, but yet there at the William Natcher Federal Courthouse was,
a major trial
going on.
Yes, or a major, yes. And ABC News did a piece on that recently, which I thought was interesting, because their conclusion was that, guess what, the government should have done better background checks to avoid these kinds of things happening.
Well, not to mention the Bowling Green police chief saying, who's watching this store here? That this is going on in my city, and, it doesn't seem like there was any oversight.
Yeah.
Well, there's so many good examples in Bowling Green of international refugees. There's a growing Liberian population, people who've come from Southeast Asia. And I think that we heard from several people who were just concerned and wanted to let people know that the vast majority of people that seek asylum or come here in refugee
One bad
status
apple, yeah.
are here to live their lives and flee violence back home and threat of persecution. And apparently these gentlemen came as refugees. And again, tying it in with our congressional delegation, Senator Paul made a lot of noise after that about why are we allowing anybody to seek this type of status from Iraq? Why are we trying to relocate them here?
It's an interesting question, and it speaks to tolerance. What are we willing to tolerate to help these individuals? And as you mentioned, Kevin, so aptly, the refugee population here for years, for decades, has been, just a model for other parts of the country. But with that, you run some risks. Okay, let's bring it on home to our local news, because guess what? We're quickly running out of time. You cover education in this area.
Yes.
And there was an issue, and it was related to, well, help us understand that. It was related to the city and the county schools, Bowling Green City, Warren County.
It was kind of like a fight between two really good school systems. And what happened was the county school system allows the city school system so many kids to enroll. And they set a number. And for years that number hasn't changed. And then one day they decided to change it. They dropped it from 850 to 664. Now the key to that was there were 86 kids that lived in the county but went to the city schools.
But they paid that $300.
They paid that $300 tuition, yeah. But when they graduated, then that gives the city schools the opportunity to get transfers from the Catholic school and also incoming kindergarten students. When they dropped it below and took in the 86 kids, now they cut them off at the knees. They didn't have any ability to bring in new students. And they were telling basically parents, you're going to have to pay the tuition and the state money, about $4,000 for a public education. Is what it costs
for a year.
Yeah. So what they did was they appealed it, the city schools did. And the bottom line was they got the 86 kids back. But the two sides now have to sit down and come up with some kind of a long-term solution so that the parents are not sitting saying, where's Mary going to go to school next year?
Yeah. So it's as we speak, we understand that discussions are underway.
There have been some talks behind the scenes, I understand. The thing that was really interesting to me is when they originally set up an agreement almost a decade ago, neither school board actually approved the agreement because they didn't want to reignite what had started as a big controversy in 2000. Well, because they didn't want to own that stepchild, it came back to haunt them because they didn't have an agreement once it was all said and done.
Moral of that story, right?
Yeah.
So that's something to watch.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, we got to talk about it. Obamacare, the rollout. For a long time, I don't know how long, but for a long time, when you see statistics about Kentucky, what do we normally see? We're right at the bottom. Excuse me, there's always an expression, thank goodness for Mississippi, right? Because often they're below us. But in this instance, Kentucky has shined with the rollout of its KY Connect and its affordable health care. I mean, we have shined, which is lovely. However, at the national level, not so shiny, okay? So
yeah, you're right, Barb. There's been so many national publications, from National Public Radio to USA Today, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, when evaluating how healthcare.gov has done against some of the state versions. And when the question comes to, well, who's doing it right, Kentucky's at the top of that list. And It's interesting to note some of the reasons why, and they seem so fairly obvious. I'm no tech guru, I'm no webmaster, but one of the things that came out is that the Kentucky site Connect just doesn't have a lot of the same bells and whistles. They didn't try to do so much.
Less is better?
Yeah,
Yes.
there weren't a lot of graphics that took up a lot of bandwidth, like at healthcare.gov. You could basically window shop at the Kentucky site. You could, without having to log in and get a username and password like you did at the federal site, which caused a lot of error messages and screen crashes. You could just basically go on to the Kentucky site and window shop ahead of trying to sign up. And imagine this, instead of just taking a few days or weeks to test the website, the people running the Kentucky website took reportedly 3 months to test this thing before it went live in early October, as opposed to reportedly only 2 weeks for the federal healthcare site. So those are some of the reasons that have been cited as why Kentucky has done so much better.
And Governor Beshear has run with this, which is a good thing.
He's taken on this issue of the Affordable Care Act and the expansion of Medicaid, which is part of the Affordable Care Act. The way I see it, I think he's a man completely unfettered by the prospect of having to run for re-election. It seems like he can't run for governor again, of course. It's his second term. He has said that he's not running for other office. So I don't think
they were lobbying him, I think, in some circles to possibly run against Senator McConnell.
That was certainly talked about.
Yeah.
Some of the Democrats wanted that. But as a man who doesn't seem to have to run for re-election, he seems to be able to govern as he pleases, and he's
or how
speaking.
About, put the period there. He seems to be able to govern. Period. Right?
He called the expansion, the Medicaid expansion, that portion of the Affordable Care Act, that each state had the decision. The Supreme Court case in 2012 upholding Obamacare left the decision on the Medicaid expansion up to each state. And the governor took his time, but when he came out and said, yes, we're going to expand to cover an estimated 308,000 more Kentuckians, he did so with really strong language. He called it the moral thing to do. He called it the most single important decision of our lifetime regarding health care. So those are really, really strong words. Yes, Steve Beshear is a Democrat, but he's a conservative, moderate Democrat in a conservative state that sends some very, very conservative people to Congress.
So I mean that's nothing but good for the state of Kentucky as it relates. We were talking that as we're recording this program, we had some news today about Obamacare.
Yeah, the Obamacare, because it rolled out so badly, the president lost a little of his political capital, and now they're getting a budget deal together. They've got to pass it, I think, by January 15th. But the two sides, the Senate and the House, are starting to talk. They're starting to talk about numbers, and most importantly, they're starting to talk about rolling back some of the money that would have been taken in the sequestration. About $65 billion over 2 years, which, that's a lot.
A mere $65 billion?
Well,
yes.
you're talking they're now able to spend $1 trillion instead of $900 billion. I'm sorry, thousands don't exist when it comes to the federal budget. But they've gotten to the point because Obamacare was such a flop that they're starting to talk a little bit, and they're starting to realize, okay, we got to fix this thing, and here's how we can do it. We can fix the budget. Obamacare will roll out. I mean, they'll get all the bugs worked out.
And they are, as we speak. It appears things are going smoothly.
And they should have taken 3 months to look at their website, just like Kentucky did. Maybe Kentucky should have been consulted and said, well, this is how you do it.
This is how you do it. Now, some of these monies you're hoping will trickle down, as the education reporter for the Bowling Green Daily News, to maybe education circles?
Well, I mean, every dollar for education that's available needs to be available for these local school districts. They are hamstrung, and they need help right now.
In talking to a lot of lawmakers right now ahead of the 2014 General Assembly, one of the big there's been a couple of question marks. One is some tobacco settlement money, whether or not Kentucky's going to have that, about $45 million. That's sort of in limbo right now. And another thing would be the exact impact of the next round of sequester cuts and how that trickles down, and how that impact, when lawmakers are sitting down already in a tight situation to try to divvy out what's there to a lot of what they'll call worthwhile causes and organizations and projects. Is all the tobacco settlement money going to be there? They may not know that until March. How's the next round of sequester really going to trickle down and impact a state like Kentucky? They don't necessarily know that either. And they're going to have to craft the next 2-year state budget starting in
And then
January.
we'll be reporting on that throughout the year. That's certainly something for 2014. Industrial hemp, Kentucky's ready. If indeed it's legalized at the national or at the federal level, we'll see.
This was the pet project of the Republican Agriculture Commissioner, James Comer. And another example of an interesting situation where you have the politics made strange bedfellows. You have John Yarmouth, the one and only Democrat in Kentucky's congressional delegation, a proud liberal, standing beside Rand Paul, standing beside other Republicans, Thomas Massey, very Tea Party darling conservative from northeastern Kentucky, all in favor of industrial hemp. And the infrastructure, the bill that passed in Kentucky, what's been done is that to create an infrastructure so that if hemp is legalized at the federal level, that Kentucky can be ready, or at least more ready to move forward with it. And this has caused a bit of a spat, it seems, too, between Commissioner Comer, who at one point said, we're moving ahead. They write a letter to the federal government, he told this to his staffers, write a letter, we're moving ahead. Attorney General Jack Conway, a Democrat, said, hold on, it's still federal law that we can't do this. So that'll be something to watch in the next year.
So maybe a future gubernatorial election,
Possibly.
you think? We're out of time. So in one word, if you can, as journalists, give me one word. What's going to be the hot topic of 2014? What do you
Rand
think?
Paul.
Rand Paul.
That's 2 words, sorry.
Okay, close.
Can I give 2?
Yeah.
Kentucky Senate.
Kentucky Senate. There you go. A special thanks to you, Kevin Willis, the news director of WKU's NPR station, WKYU-FM, and Chuck Mason has joined us. He's the education reporter for the Bowling Green Daily News. We've been looking at 2013 in review and looking ahead to 2014. You heard it here. That's going to wrap it up for this week's edition of Kentucky Outlook. Until next time, I'm Barbara Deep. Thanks for joining us.